everyone, welcome to another edition of Real, Random and Raw. Just myself this week, James Forrester. Phil is actually on other pressing matters, but we have a wonderful guest this week. This is very much a property podcast from that, so if you want to know everything about property and what's going on in the world of property, you definitely want to watch this. But my guest this week, Russell Quirk. How are you this week, Russell?
Yeah, hi James, very well, thank you, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, this is Real, Random and Raw. To show how raw it is, we'd already started talking about this, and I forgot to press record, so we've had to start again. So apologies for that for yourself.
It was the rehearsal.
I'll definitely not make a video producer, let's put it that way. So Russell, big news obviously in the last couple of weeks. Piers Morgan's disappeared, he's gone off. A lot of people would say you are the Piers Morgan in the property world. Very controversial. You only have to put a comment out and either people hate you or love you. So why do you think that is?
The old Marmite thing. I guess way back when I started a business called eMove that some people might be familiar with, which was one of the first online estate agencies, I realised that because basically I didn't have a huge marketing budget back then, so 2009, 2010, the way to get noticed by journalists, and this, if I roll forward, is kind of how the whole propaganda PR thing started, which I founded with James Lockett 3 years ago. Basically, it was to make noise, but you can't just make noise, you have to get noticed. And the way to get noticed is to kind of say, either things that are really funny or things that are interesting stroke controversial. So my style at the beginning of the eMove project was to kind of poke a stick at the high street estate agency business, because look, in fairness, and look, you might disagree with me here, James, because you're a little bit biased, but there were and still are fundamental issues with the kind of foundations of estate agency. It's not great in the UK, in my opinion, in terms of service delivered to the customer and the general kind of standards. And it's not just me saying that. Every survey that you read and every set of data from the property ombudsman around complaints and so on shows that people are generally, not always, but generally not very happy with estate agents. So I kind of wanted to unpick that, I suppose. And in doing so and poking a bit of stick and a bit of fun at high street estate agents, I got this certain reputation within the industry where, obviously, naturally, I suppose, a number of people took issue with what I was saying. So roll forward now, when I write a column for Property Industry Eye, which is one of the leading trade publications, or I put something on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever, where I'm trying to be, I suppose, a bit provocative, but I want to start conversations. I want us to think deep about the industry and how to improve it. That's the main thing. And of course, if you talk about, a certain regulatory body, in my opinion, not being very good and fit for purpose, or we talk about, have the days of the branch office gone? Should fees be higher? Should fees be lower? Are online estate agents good or bad? The natural reaction, I think, for a lot of the kind of dyed-in-the-wool types in the property industry is to want to shut the door on that conversation. It's no, we're fine as we are. But of course, you don't get progress, improvement and innovation unless you kind of kick the tires on this stuff, and that's what I aim to do.
No, exactly. And obviously, as you said, you're co-founder now of Propaganda PR, obviously a big PR company, obviously representing, property companies, financial companies, etc., to gain, obviously, traction in the press and get their comments out. And like I think you've just touched on there, if everything was plain sailing, nobody wants to read about it anyway. So people love the controversial elements on that, or factual elements of what's going on. But prior to this, you used to be Purple Bricks' biggest challenger, for those who don't know, because this won't just be aired for property people. There will be people thinking, well, who is this guy? And it was obviously eMove. And I think it's interesting because I love the Purple Bricks model. You signed a contract, you got paid no matter what, if you sold it or not. It protected the business, because I think in a estate agency, we are very vulnerable that we can do a lot of work and not get paid at the end of it. And that's the way it currently works, where their model was very slick on, you signed it, they got paid, regardless if they sold the house or not. I think my issue, what I had with it was far too cheap from this, and with rising costs, it wasn't working as well. And also, you probably didn't get the commitment from the sales staff to get the property sold as much as you would have liked. Now, eMove was very similar. Unfortunately, it went through a few changes. It sort of changed it in a way, but you've sort of changed now as well, because online hasn't really worked out. We probably both expected, or probably every estate agent on the high street who got really panicked about it, it really hasn't changed in 2 or 3 years.
No, look, the online estate agency sector really hasn't grown in 3 or 4 years, really. I think the peak was probably 2017, something like that. And I had, and everybody else in the sector, whether it's Purple Bricks, whether it was House Network, and others, we all had high expectations because we thought there was a logic to doing a job that the public perceive as quite expensive, doing it for less money. And actually, with some of us, I mean, eMove and House Network, for instance, we didn't try and cut corners. We still did, without boring you with the details of estate agency ins and outs, we still did offer qualification, making sure that buyers had a mortgage, sales progression, and so on, which Purple Bricks and others just don't really in reality. So we tried to kind of break it and improve it, I suppose, and commoditize it. And what then happened is once online estate agency got to about a 6 or 7% market share, which of course isn't much, so literally only 6 or 7 transactions out of every 100, it stalled, even though there were people like Purple Bricks who had an advertising budget of about £17 million a year, plus what we were all spending as their competitors. So there was about, 40, 50 million quid a year going into marketing. And it wasn't moving the needle after a few years. And I think the reason was that although the public perceive estate agents actually generally not to be very good, that's what the surveys say, and that's what the Ombudsman complaints data says. Even though that's the perception, and the perception is that estate agents are quite expensive, when you try to make something even cheaper, I think sometimes there's a suspicion that it's too cheap to be any good. It's like the what I call the breakfast test. If I see a sign outside a restaurant or a cafe or a pub for a full English breakfast for £3, I'm not going to buy it. I don't want to go in because it's going to be rubbish. Right? And I think that's from the online estate agent. So it's almost, I suppose, the other end of the extreme for the marketers out there, James, is the Stella Artois kind of approach, which is reassuringly expensive. I think you can only push that too far, and you can certainly push that to an extent in the luxury sector. But I suppose what I'm saying is the public perceive that estate agents are kind of okay. It's okay to pay 1 to 2% of your selling price. But above all, to your point, and this is really key, the majority of estate agency transactions, the consumer only pays at the end. So obviously it's a success fee. But really importantly, and here's the kind of psychology at play, I think, is that you don't write a check out for the estate agency fee. You never put your hand in your pocket because, of course, it comes out of the proceeds of sale. The lawyer takes it and pays the agent 3 or 4 days after completion. So I think we completely kind of misread that completely. So you think cheap, do it well, we're off to the races. Now, I certainly had investors. I raised £29 million in venture, private equity and high net worth funding for that business over 5 years. And obviously, we ran out of cash in 2018. Business went into administration. But, some very clever investors, some really smart people invested in eMove and other businesses. People like Charles Dunstan and Stelios from Easy and, Tosca Fund and goodness knows who else. We all perceived the same, that it would just be linear, but exponential. But it's topped out. And now I don't think online estate agency, Purple Bricks, Strike, whoever they are, a business has just changed their name to Strike. I just don't think they're going to get any more traction ever. I think the key is, if we're going to geek out on estate agency for a few seconds, the key is for really good estate agents, like Barrows and Forrester, for instance, to actually, really exemplify how good they are, and actually for us all to be even better. So imagine being able to contact your agent on WhatsApp 24/7, which is what Keller Williams do, and I'm sure your guys do. And then you can actually start squeezing fee up, but so that it still represents really good value from the point of view of the seller. I think that's the future of estate agency. It's not cheap. It's not really technology. Tech helps, but it's about relationships and accessibility, care, knowledge, experience, and actually, just doing the job really, really well and above client expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've touched on a really interesting point there, because obviously now you have a Keller Williams franchise down obviously in Essex. Obviously, I'm based up in Birmingham. I don't have a Keller Williams franchise, but obviously we have our estate and letting agents business, which obviously me well. Yeah. I know you've already rang me about this to talk about it, but I think it's interesting because I agree with you that it's about the personal service. And at the end of the day, if someone should not look at the price, I'm a big believer, if someone's really fixed on the price that you're going to charge them, they're not as motivated to sell, because they should be looking at you going, look, I want 750,000 for my property, for example. You know, all day long it is worth 750,000, or it might need a little push to get to 750, but you know your worth. And the client doesn't mind paying you that 2% fee, for argument's sake, if you get them 750. If they want to pay 595 for argument's sake, then someone who has got high street presence and they've just dropped their fees, it's going to be very difficult to get the salesperson motivated or the marketing expertise to get that property to stand out against another 5 or 6 that might be very similar and will just present offers of 700,000, 710 all day long.
I think that, this is where I start to get a bit controversial. I think high street estate agents, the majority of estate agents in the UK, can be much, much better. But they've also painted themselves into a corner. They've allowed their fee to become commoditized, right? So, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Jones, whoever starts ringing around, local Wolverhampton estate agents on a Saturday morning. Hello, I've got a house to sell in X street. How much are you going to charge? Their answer often is, well, we're kind of 1%, but I suppose if we were pushed and you had my arm up my back, I'd do it for a bit less. So they've literally just pulled their own pants down, so to speak.
Go to a fixed fee now. And then what they don't realise is when you work it out, I had one presented yesterday, when we spoke to the client and they wanted to speak to me, they were like, I want everything you offer as a company, but X companies come round and they only want to charge $5,000. And it worked out at 0.65%. And I was like, just go with them and come back and see me in 12 weeks. Yeah. And I said, I'm not that fussed. And the fact that I did that, they were like, we'll just give it to you. They went, you're that confident.
And interestingly, it's always the cheapest estate agents in the high street that go bust, not the ones that charge a decent fee. And here's another a stat that I think is fascinating, is that 60% of all homes that go on the market sell via the second estate agent that's instructed by the seller, not the first. Because, the first agent is the one that maybe fibs a little bit, overvalues, and of course in our profession overvaluing is, it's the biggest problem I think facing estate agents and the consumer. It's a real cancer, actually. Let's
touch on that, actually, because it's an interesting point here, overvaluation, isn't it? Because a lot of people blame the estate agent for overvaluing. Now, I think with some of the corporates, I think that's very true, because their job is just get as many listings in as possible and they'll say whatever's needed to win it. But there's also the point of the client, who might be sitting there going, I'm only going to give it to you if, for example, you tell me it's 750 and you put it on, but it's only worth 700,000. So you think, well, hang on a minute. It should be our job as professionals to say, look, I know what you're saying. However, and there's a lot of agents who are very good who will do this, but then they run the risk losing the listing. And that's why that stat is so high that 60% will sell to the agent.
And we all know that the unscrupulous agent in overvaluing the property or acquiescing to the seller. So the seller says, I want 750, and the agent thinks, well, it's worth 650. The agent takes it anyway, and of course, then to protect themselves, gets the seller to sign a 16 to 20 week sole agency agreement, what I call the sole agency trap, which is, doesn't really matter what the owner wants. I know that if I sign them up for 5 months, they can't go to another agent without paying my fee anyway. What will happen is they'll get really desperate, they'll reduce, and I'll sell it. And this is another reason why the reputation of estate agents is terrible, because you've literally got, I don't know if it's the majority or the minority of estate agents, but walking into people's homes, telling them what they want to hear, blowing smoke, taking the thing on the market, knowing that actually it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 weeks down the line where they go for the reduction and then they'll sell it. And of course that's successful some of the time, hence the fact that 40% of properties sell via the first agent. But agents need to be strong enough, but also just professional enough, to say to the seller, and look, I still sell properties here and there. So although my main business is propaganda PR, that's kind of 80% of my time. Because of my Keller Williams involvement, occasionally I get someone call me and say, because they know me, can you put my house on the market? And if I'm honest, if it's interesting enough, I'll do it, right? But I'm also, because I'm so busy, I suppose I have an advantage that most of the people that I deal with are people that I know, that therefore know and trust me. So they'll kind of understand when I say, no, Malcolm, that flat in Marylebone that you want me to put on the market is not worth £1 million. They'll believe me more, but I don't need the business so much. So it's quite easy for me just to walk away. And that's what I do, because Otherwise, I mean, when you think about it, at any one time on Rightmove, particularly now as the market's kind of hot but cooling off a little bit as we get towards the end of the stamp duty holiday at the end of June, why are there 650,000 properties on the market? Why don't they all sell within a day, 3 days, or a week, or even 2 weeks? Why do so many languish on the market? And it is, to your point, it's sellers being a bit naive, because what they do, like my friend from Marleybone, he looked on Rightmove and he said, but there's flats on there, Russell, at £1 million. And I said, how long have they been on the market for, Malcolm? Oh, I don't know. I said, well, you can tell because you can see the date now on Rightmove. And let me share my screen with you. And then you look and you see that flat A, B, C, D, and E have all been on the market between 6 and 18 months, for instance. But you've got to have the guts and the professionalism to say what's what and what's right, and use data, use evidence. And I tend to find with property clients, if you're honest and straightforward, but also show evidence, you kind of make the point, and you kind of win the business in the right way. Then I think.
No, absolutely, and obviously, moving forward, Keller Williams, American. Do you think that the likes of Selling Sunset, $1 million, New York and Miami, do you think that's now having a big part in the UK market, where we're not quite there yet to have a B2B relationship really only between agents? But do you think the way that they handle their clients, that they are contactable 24/7, they are all about the evidence, all about the comps that are on the market, as they will say, and they can fight back? Do you think that's really filtering through because of Netflix and everyone showing it more, that people are actually realizing there is a better property market out there?
Yeah, I think it would take a while for the consumer to understand the difference. I don't think the consumer really understands the difference between, for instance, Purple Bricks and Connells. They just see it's an estate agency, and one is maybe a bit cheaper than the other. And of course, as we've said, what our job is to make sure that the value proposition differences are shown. Because of course, Purple Bricks, for instance, you're on your own for most of it, but with other agents, high street agents, you have your hand held. So I think it would take a while for the penny to drop with the consumer. I think the penny is dropping with agents. So, I think that if an agent sells £1 million home at 1%, and it's a 10 grand fee, therefore, the agent understands that actually if they take £7,000 personally of that 10 grand, they are obligated to that client, because how can you not be when you're taking so much money off of them? But also, again, back to the psychology of it all, you tend to be you have more of a kind of an obligation to be good when it comes to customer service and accessibility, because you're earning that kind of money. So I think agents are starting to see that. So as a consequence, we're starting to see the beginnings of what I think will become, you can maybe have a go at me here, because I once predicted that online estate agency would be 30% of all transactions in the UK, and here I am, and I was wrong, very wrong. Here I am about to make another prediction. I'm seeing, whether it's Keller Williams or there's others like EXP and Fine and Country and so on, that will start to get, and is starting to get, traction, where good agents think, actually, I can go out and get the business, because that's what I'm doing for Foxtons already. I want to do the listing. I want to do the offer negotiation. I can bring in an assistant to help me do the admin and the sales progression, and I can take most of the fee, backed by a business like Keller Williams, for instance, that provides brand, technology, compliance, training, and a kind of family support. So I genuinely think that is the future, and I think the clever businesses, and you and I talked about this the other day, the clever businesses are those that do.
My business plan on here, though, because mine's slightly different, but it's very similar, but a little bit differential in it.
But my experience of dealing with the public, which is pretty extensive, is that they're perfectly fine knowing that you as the agent are taking the majority of the fee personally, but then they're going to hold you accountable. And I think that's absolutely fine and acceptable. If you walk into my local high street here in Shenfield to sell your 500 grand house, your 300 grand flat, and you discover that the agent you're dealing with for 6 months, so the person that's going to hold your hand, build the relationship, find the buyer, do the offer negotiation, blah, 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 you find out they're earning 200 quid in commission. Well, how good are they going to be? It's Sainsbury's money, right? It really is.
And it is, Russell. And I think it's very interesting because I think in our property world, for an estate, it's different between estate agent and developers in a way, because developers are quite blunt about this, about commissions and what they pay out, and will come out and say it. But an estate agent doesn't want to, and it's like they've got scared that commission is a bad word. Where our job as estate agents is to sell the client's property for the right price. That's on the market, and we have to get it marketed in different ways. Some are harder than others. And so you've got to spend money, to get that as well. And if you're not getting the right money in, that you can do the right marketing, and also your salesperson can get the right commission to be motivated to say, you know what, I've got 5 listings, I'm not going to do anything until all 5 are sold, then they're not committed, from that. And I think that's the difference where people don't get what they really want and they don't get the service that they really crave. But they've got to be prepared to say, right, I want people to get paid well.
Yeah, and I think it's a very interesting dynamic that, the US and Australia, they charge much higher fees, and the agents themselves earn a big proportion of that. So when you look at, to your point, $1 million list in New York and LA and so on, and you see that those guys are earning $30,000, $50,000 a deal, the perception from the US public is, well done, that's brilliant. You're a success, you're an entrepreneur, you're hardworking, because you will wake up at 5 a.m. to answer a call from someone in China that wants to sell or buy a property. And that's kind of all fine. In the UK, we've kind of got into this situation where we're kind of almost pilloried by the public, vilified by the public. We don't earn enough as an agency or as individuals. And I think the answer is basically pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, earn more, take more, be better. And as a consequence, I think perceptions will increase. I think that's what will happen. I think that's what should happen. And look, there'll always be cheap and cheerful agents. And you're absolutely right. I think the clown of a seller, bless them, that rings up and says, what's your fee? My answer always is, are you looking for the cheapest? When they say yes, just say, that's not me. It's just not me. Thanks.
Yeah. How's your day been? I'll have a quick 5-minute chat with you, but that's about as far as I'm going to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you believe in cheap, Mr. Smith, where do you take your wife on your anniversary? Do you take her to McDonald's?
Yeah.
Because that's cheap, right? Or you ring round restaurants and ask, for the biggest discount. No, I bet you don't. I bet you understand that the value, not the cost, are two different things. And of course, you go out and spend 200 quid on a restaurant, don't you? Why do you do that?
It's a very valid point, actually, because it's a bit like if you're buying a new car. A lot of people will not negotiate the cost. They'll just go, do I get a discount? And they'll go, no. But selling your house is probably the biggest asset that you own. And it's the one thing that you want to pay the least amount to sell for. And I think the perception's got to change, because in America it works very well. Australia was very much the UK model until they realised everyone will just go broke if they do it, and they changed to the American system in a way. And obviously their market has boomed. People are getting more for their money. Property prices are very expensive in Australia, in most of the cities now as well. They've gone up, but everything's gone up obviously with wages, etc., to do that. So that's obviously on a business point. Obviously we have consumers watching this who will think, right, we don't really get that yet, but we will do. But one thing they do love to know is about house prices, what they're going to be doing, stamp duty, how much they can save. But before we get on to it, one thing that many people probably don't know about you is you are a political geek in a way, as you love politics, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I was a councillor in my hometown for 8 years, and I gave that up in 2015, and I've kind of remained, a bit of a political hobbyist, I suppose. I'm fascinated by politics. I both love it and hate it. I mean, it's a very frustrating thing to kind of be involved in and to watch from the sidelines, because it's so messy. But I think politics is fascinating, and particularly when you go through, I know it's a cliche, but unprecedented times, whether it's, Brexit, whether it's, COVID straight after that, and just to see how politicians behave. I also feel very strongly that most politicians, a bit like estate agents really, aren't very good. And certainly I'm sick to the back teeth of watching politicians ask questions that they just refuse to answer, because they've got a huge kind of strategic and comms team behind the scenes that when they go on to Piers Morgan, as you mentioned earlier, or Kay Burley or Laura Kunsberg or Peston or whatever, they've already got the answers in their heads to the questions, whether that question is asked or not. And I hate that.
Well, let's put you on the spot here. Piers Morgan, is that the end of GMB, do you reckon? Now he's gone? Do you reckon ITV have messed up here?
GMB, say what you like about Piers Morgan, as you know, I'm not always a fan of him. I think his style is really irritating. The fact he interrupts constantly, and it's all about him in the way that he wants to grab the opportunity to talk about his question and the person's answer on social media later. So it's about him, not the question, and not the person he's interviewing. I think it's a great loss to them commercially because, of course, over the last few months, even last week, I think, he tweeted to say their share of the breakfast audience had gone up. It was now 35% or whatever, highest ever for GMB. And yeah, the viewership, if there's such a word, viewership is up significantly. So he's definitely an attraction. And I don't know who else you get to replace him. And the problem is, of course, the reason he's left is because ITV wanted him to make some kind of woke apology to Meghan, and because of what he said about Meghan, he didn't believe her. Well, I'm a very strong advocate of you don't have the right not to be offended, in my opinion. And it's actually good to have debate, cut and thrust, and a bit of kind of argy-bargy here and there on the basis that you then get debate flying and innovation and improvement as a consequence of that, right? Sunlight, disinfectant, blah, blah. So who do you replace Piers Morgan with? You either replace him with some woke yogurt knitter who isn't going to get any ratings, or you replace him with someone that might upset everybody that will be fired in a week's time again. So I think, yeah, GMB is done. Piers Morgan.
I don't think Graham Norton will want to get up that early in the morning, to be honest. I think he's the only other one who would probably ask the questions that Piers would as well.
Yeah, maybe. Or, I quite like, the Paxman style, I think was good. Andrew Neil, I think, is absolutely fantastic. Probably the best political journalist of the last God knows how many years and decades. But of course, Andrew Neil is starting his own TV channel called GB News. And he's already started to attract some kind of right of centre people. So, people like Andrew Neil and Julia Hartley-Brewer are rumoured to be going to GB News. So basically, it'll be like a talk radio, kind of right of centre rolling news channel, like a Fox News in the US. So Piers Morgan might end up there if they can pay him the £2 million that apparently he was alleged to be on at GMB. So I don't think it's the end of Piers Morgan. I think you're right. It probably is the end of GMB. They'll probably wheel on someone like Eamon Holmes, who's lovely, but it's all a bit vanilla, isn't it? And I don't.
It is. Yeah, and I think also that he's already got his ITV own arguments himself anyway, hasn't he? So ITV can be going down a slippery slope here, I reckon. So let's put you on the spot of a couple of others. Donald Trump, good or bad thing that he's no longer president, because the current president seems to be still asleep?
Yeah, look, Biden got elected basically as the ticking the box of anyone but Trump. I don't think it was about Biden. I think it was about people voting not for Trump. I'm not a fan of Trump. I think Trump, was A, stupid, B, divisive, and C, the most egotistical narcissist ever. I think he was a dangerous individual. Would I prefer to see Republican or Democrat in the White House? I mean, I hover between the two. I'm probably a right-wing Democrat, but I'm a kind of liberal Republican, I guess. I'm kind of, slightly in the middle. But I think overall, I don't think Dominic Trump did anything for the presidency. And I think famously someone said, didn't they, that when you're president of the United States, it's about what you can do for the people, whereas Donald Trump mistook that for what you can do for yourself. Yeah. I think Biden's probably got good intentions, but I think he's already coming apart at the seams, James, isn't he? He couldn't remember the name of his his defense secretary and forgot what the Pentagon was called this week. So that's not a good start, is it?
It's definitely not fun getting up, checking Twitter in the morning at the moment. I think that was a highlight. It was like, what's he put out like in the early hours of the morning to see what the news is going to be based on. But bringing it back across the Atlantic, let's look at this. Boris, regardless if you love him or hate him as well, COVID, we're eventually on the right, it looks like we're on the right track now to come out of lockdown. Do you think we should be coming out of lockdown quicker than we are at the moment?
Yeah, I do. Because look, I was shot down in flames months and months ago for saying, if 15-year-olds and 20-year-olds don't die from COVID, why are we locking them down? And I understand the argument that they then go and hug their granny, and the granny obviously dies as a consequence, sadly. But I don't think people are stupid. So I think if you I don't believe in imposing stuff on people. I think if you're 90 years old with diabetes and you're overweight, you've got to be pretty stupid to go out and start hugging, kissing and shaking hands, haven't you? So
Yeah.
I think we should shield the vulnerable. Now that the vulnerable, 90% of the vulnerable, those over 70 and those with underlying health conditions have been vaccinated, I don't understand why we should continue to lock down quite so hard. And it fills me with horror, frankly, when Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty stand up on TV on their platform that they've been afforded and start saying things like, we might have to wear masks for years, we might have to social distance for years, we might have to lock down again in autumn, winter 2021. That to me is ridiculous, it's abhorrent, and it's not the politics that I voted for in the last general election. And I think Boris has got a real problem. I think we've kind of all tolerated the science, which is, can I say this word? Can you bleep out? It's bullshit, to be honest, because there's so many different scientific opinions now.
I'll believe it. It's raw. Don't worry.
Yeah, there's so many different scientific opinions now. You can ask 10 scientists a question and get 10 different answers. So following the science doesn't make any sense. But Boris, I think, has used that as cover. I think he's generally done okay. Obviously, he's made mistakes, but we all would have done, right? Because there's no textbook or roadmap for how to deal with COVID. But I think if he doesn't unlock now, given that his politics are of a libertarian nature, so his nature is to kind of free everybody, I think he's toast. I really do. And although the election's quite a way away now, James, I think, I certainly, if we continue with this ridiculous, over-suffocating approach to COVID and lockdown, I won't ever vote Conservative again. I resigned my Conservative Party membership. First time I told anyone this, actually, last week on the budget. Because Rishi Sunak, so I've been a member of the Conservative Party on and off for years and years and years, Conservative councillor for 8 years and so on. But when Rishi Sunak stood up at the budget and said that he was hiking corporation tax from 19 to 25% in 2023, so that's an increase of 31%. That's the sort of thing that Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell would have done if they got elected. I definitely didn't vote for that shower, frankly. So how on earth can I now support a Conservative Party that thinks that basically penalising good, successful, hard-working businesses like yours and mine, that's not Conservative. That's just not the way forward. So I think Boris underestimates his Conservative base and their feelings on lockdown, tax and so on at his peril.
It's interesting you say that, and obviously breaking news there about you obviously giving up your membership there, and I think it's interesting COVID because hospitality, we'll all agree with, is literally being the ones who've been hung up to dry in all this. A lot of people are losing great restaurants. They can't even put food on their table for their own family because they have no income. But there's always a good side out of a bad situation, and obviously very much in the food industry naturally because everyone needs to eat, but the property industry, for once, when anything goes wrong, the property industry is usually the hardest hit. But for some reason, COVID's done the opposite, and it's done remarkably well during this. Your predictions for 2021 for property prices: crash or increase?
Boom. Not just increase, it'll be a boom. And I said this back in March, April, as I think you know. You and I were just the only two people, I think, that were saying, actually, I think property prices are going to be okay. And we saw in the end in 2020, despite COVID, but because of government stimulus, stamp duty holidays, and so on, we saw property prices increase by 8%. No one predicted that. And literally, there were only one or two of us saying that property prices would go up. Everybody else, Savills, Knight Frank, HSBC, Halifax, they're all talking about drops of up to 30%. That's just moronic. That's ridiculous. And it was proven to be ridiculous. But we've got the same doomsayers now, of course, March 2021, saying the same thing, because they take all the negatives that they believe should be at play and they forget to balance them against the positives. So the negatives being, in their book, mass unemployment, economic uncertainty, furlough scheme ending, everyone falls off a cliff and so on. But without thinking about the fundamental positives. And those fundamental positives are interest rates at the Bank of England rate of 0.1%. I reckon they'll go negative. So mortgage rates will go from, let's say, a standard variable of 2.5%. They'll potentially go down to 1.5%. So money will be the cheapest it's ever been in British history to borrow to buy a home. We've now got an extension of the stamp duty holiday times 2, because obviously there were 2 elements to that in the budget. We've got the Boris mortgage, which is the 95% mortgage with, a part of it in terms of the deposit that you're not paying guaranteed. Loads more stimulus to come. And I think, and look, here's the human behaviour, the psychological bit that I'm, quite a big fan of, I suppose, in terms of watching, is that when we come out of lockdown completely, what's everybody going to do? They are going to spend money like Billy-O. There's £100 billion, they reckon, sitting under the kind of floorboards and the mattresses of the British public that hasn't been spent because of lockdown. So I think when it comes to food, restaurants, pubs, retail, white goods, holidays, cars, and homes, and all the things that go in your home, there will be a kind of VE Day type celebration this year, which will pull the economy up. That will reflect itself in sentiment and the housing market as a consequence. This year we'll see a further boom in the property market. Mark my words.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I think we both agree. We're both predicting around 4%, give or take, it's going to be. Because a lot of people have forgotten about, if you try and find a tradesperson available at the moment and send them my way, because they're all flat out. Yeah. And a lot of people have forgotten that everyone's gone in their houses. If they've had nothing to do, they've been getting new kitchens in, all their gardens have turned out into massive entertainment areas. And this is going to have a great impact on property values being valued, obviously, going around. And all that money will get released again within the next year when people go to do remortgages. And as you say, we'll look at cars, extra housing, investments, and go forward. So very interesting indeed. Now, interesting though today, as we're recording this, is though the news coming out is that COVID's now taking place and less people are putting their house on the market. Now, is that fact or is that Rightmove creating bad headlines because agents are starting to leave Rightmove in their droves since they've just increased all their prices?
So, sorry, what was the what's the?
So the headline coming out is that listings are down on Rightmove by 22%. Yeah. They're obviously now blaming COVID because people don't want to go in people's houses and they feel afraid. Now, is that fact or is it because you reckon agents are leaving Rightmove in their droves at the moment because, of course, they've increased their prices? And actually, it's a good cover-up where there's bigger issues there in the number one portal in the UK.
Yeah, no, interesting point. There's certainly some portal wars about to happen. Obviously we've got Boomin, which is the Purple Bricks founders, the Bruce brothers, launching in the next couple of weeks. So it'd be interesting to see if they take business from Rightmove. So yes, it might well be that Rightmove are losing agents. I do think there's an element of people not wanting to show people around in lockdown. But I think the main reason that listings are down is because a lot of the listings have already happened because they've been pulled forward because of the stamp duty holiday. So, people aren't going to list their house in February, for instance, if they thought that the stamp duty holiday finished a month later, because they know that there wouldn't be enough time to get a buyer and get the thing through the conveyancing process. So I think that's inevitable. But, we also, I've got to be careful. I don't want to slag off the media too much because obviously they form part of my living. But the media love a bit of sensationalism, or they love a bit of bad news that they can tweak and twist to be even more sensational. So, if you find something that says, oh, listings are down or house prices have dropped by 0.3% month on month, that can very quickly get turned into a much broader story and reasoning, as if that's the end of the world. House prices are now going to plummet. Listings are going to fall off a cliff when it's only 4 weeks data from one source. So I think it'll all smooth out. I really, really do. But we've certainly seen in the last 6 months an abnormal property market. I don't know if you'd agree, in terms of listings up, sales up, completions up. December numbers, normally in December, we see about 80,000 completions. There were 107,000 completions, so 30% up this December, primarily because of the stamp duty holiday. So I think it's a number of things, but anybody that forecasts the demise of the property market or the property industry is nuts.
I totally agree. And I think, look, we're at record lows of borrowing for interest rates at the moment. The stamp duty holiday. So as everyone, the biggest leak, obviously, for Rishi's budget, that £500,000 extended till the end of June. I think the biggest surprise was he then dropped it still to zero, anything up to 250,000 till the end of September. So very clever there to keep that property market, moving forward before it returns out. And I think obviously next Friday, or the Friday after, from when this will end, the Friday after it says, will be the big Friday because all conveyancers will be set up for that 26 real deadline to make sure they can get as many completions through because they were set up ready for the original deadline. But I think for the property market at the moment, this is every 10 years, I've said, is usually the best time to buy and sell property, because when we had the financial crash, again, there were, property prices, sort of really came down because there was a bit of a crash in the market. But at the same time, it was one of the best times to buy property, and we got a lot of incentives to get back into the property market. We're 10 years again, and we're getting exactly the same. Really to push the fourth biggest industry under UK economy wise to go forward. So this is the time to buy and sell, and I think every agent out there and every consumer needs to be looking very seriously and thinking, what, I might be putting it off, but I'm going to get my property on the market. This is the time to take advantage, because it will not be there for a long time as we pay the trillions pounds back that we need to pay back for the COVID battle.
Yeah, and the other sign is that, as you know, the last 3 months has seen huge activity in the estate agency industry from a mergers and acquisitions point of view. So literally every day, and I'm not exaggerating, every day there's news about one business buying another, or one business buying a whole bunch of somebody's branches. Now, those businesses and the investors, the private equity houses, the public limited shareholders, if you like, that drive those businesses and their decisions, they don't do anything lightly. So if you've got the likes of Foxtons, Connells, Dexters and so on, big groups worth lots and lots of money, hundreds of millions of pounds, if they are out there aggressively buying estate agencies, you have to wonder why that is. It's obviously because they believe that property is going to boom over the next year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So I think we should be confident. And for anyone out there that says, yeah, but house prices are too high, what goes up must come down, that's just a ridiculous proposition, really. But if you also have to understand that the wider economy is linked to the property market. If the property market's in the gutter, that tends to reflect on the wider economy, which is no good for anybody, no matter who you are, no matter how left you are or how right you are of the political spectrum. Poor sentiment, high inflation, high interest rates, high unemployment, no GDP growth. It's not good for anybody. So having a buoyant property market and everyone being able to talk about that and link that then through to more positive sentiment in the wider economy as a consequence is a good thing.
Absolutely. And I think, if clients want to be very blunt, just go, as you said, look at the deals that are going ahead. We've got the Connells, the Countrywide, the Foxtons, the Douglas Gordon, as you mentioned, all going ahead at the moment. If you speak to a lot of estate agency owners, I would say a good percentage of them have bought a house while this has been going on during COVID. And there's a reason they do it. They have the inside knowledge. They know what's going on. They, look, I bought a house while all this was going on, saving £15,000 in the stamp duty. There's reasons why we do this, to take advantage. And I think for your consumer out there, this is where sometimes you have to look at agents and go, they do know what they're talking about sometimes, and they're not the worst thing, from that. But be blunt with them and ask them for their honest truth. And I think your independent agents or your franchise owners, you say, like Keller Williams, your EXPs, etc., in your finding countries, I think you will get that level of advice from them, because they do operate different to someone who's just employed by a corporate agency based on figures. And I think this is the way forward with the model itself. So I think very positive for the property market. Thank you for coming on today. And I think, let's see if we are both eating our words at the end of 2021. But if anybody would like to have that financial bet, I'm more than happy to do it. And I do think there will be an increase in the property prices by the end of this year.
Me too. I look forward to actually being able to meet up and have a glass with you to celebrate that at the end of the year, James, because I'm very convinced that we're right. And look, I have taken bets, as you know. I took bets in 2020, which are actually due to be paid out in the next few weeks, from a lot of people that said, you're mad saying that house prices are going to increase. Well, Great Ormond Street Hospital will now benefit to the tune of about £1,000 as a consequence of those bets that I took.
Well, fantastic. And it's what it is. In the property world, I'm a big believer, put your money where your mouth is, and trust your gut instinct. And as you say, go off the evidence and look at the bigger picture, not just what's on your doorstep on that particular day. Russell Quirk, thank you for coming on Real, Random and Raw. We put the episodes out every Friday. Obviously, we like to make sure our conversations are a little bit controversial, but factual, and obviously gives an insight into people's world, regardless of the industry. My name is James Forrester. Big thank you for Russell Quirk, and I will see you on the next episode on the following Friday. Thank you for now.